Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Alumless. Thank you for tuning in. Here on the show, we talk about engagement strategies and educational advancement. I am Ryan Catherwood, and the gentleman there on the other side of the screen is the one and only Chris Marshall. How are you today, Chris?
Doing great. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, here we are. Do you celebrate? You're wearing green, which I can
wore
appreciate.
green. My family just came up to say goodbye. They're off for the day, all dressed in green. So very Irish family here.
That's awesome. I'm only like a quarter Irish, so I have green underwear on today, which is too much information, right? But well, we're glad to have you. We've got a great show. We are broadcasting live today, Friday, March 17th. I would thank all of our listeners for making Alumless part of your week, and those teams out there that are listening to us. As a group, we love that. If you are an alumni engagement professional and you enjoy Alumless, we definitely encourage you to make a little team event around Alumless every other Friday at 11:30. Or if you're listening to us later after the fact on the podcast edition of Alumless, maybe you're cooking dinner, working out, we're happy to have you on the show. Thank you for tuning in and making Alumless part of your week. All right, well, we've got a great show today. We are featuring a fabulous guest, Chris Kendrick from the London School of Economics and Political Science. If you have any questions for Chris Kendrick or Chris Marshall or myself, of course, please use the comment section in the LinkedIn event where you are listening now, and we will try to tackle your question during the live broadcast. If we can't get to it during the live broadcast, we will try to tackle it during our bonus section with Chris. And of course, you can listen to that bonus section on the podcast version. So, all right, enough of the wind up. Chris, we have our first overseas guest today, which I think is pretty cool. I'm kind of surprised now 21 episodes in, we hadn't done that before, but I'm glad we're doing it now. And Chris Kendrick is the perfect guest to start with. When was the last time you were overseas for a work-related project, and what was it all about?
Overseas for work pre-pandemic, family vacation last summer, but but for work it was a industry conference in London at the British Museum. Actually, it was the last time I had a chance. I was speaking at a conference and was hosted at the British Museum, and it was amazing. I love everything about being in London and love traveling abroad, and something more of us should do. I think more of us Americans should do. Frankly.
Yeah, it's been since pre-pandemic since I've been overseas as well. And I think my last trip was the Educate Plus conference in Auckland. So, there's CASE that has a presence in the Asia Pacific region, but there's another entity in that region called Educate Plus that puts on a conference every 2 years and has a great attendance, hundreds of folks in that part of the world. But yeah,
you're pretty well traveled. Do you know the number of countries you've been to? Is that something you have on the top of your head?
That's a good question. I have probably just really been to only a handful. The UK, Australia, New Zealand, been to the Netherlands, Fiji, but mainly in the South Pacific and a little in the UK. You're probably more well-traveled than I am.
I'm at 17, and I feel like that's small, but it's more than most, I think. But I have some friends. I know a colleague was listening. He's in the 90s of different countries, so it's amazing. Some people are really traveled, which is neat.
Yeah.
Maybe people can put in the chat, in the comments, how many countries they've been to. It'd be pretty cool to see. Also, Ryan, I had somebody ask me this after the last broadcast. How do they put a comment in if they're watching it live on LinkedIn? Is it just putting into the LinkedIn
comments? Yep. Comments in LinkedIn, and we can see those comments here in the what's called StreamYard. So we use a tool called StreamYard to broadcast live on LinkedIn and on YouTube at the same time. And so if folks put in comments, we can see those here in the interface. So please do that. That'd be great. Say, if you're listening, we'd love to hear from you.
Throw in how many countries you've traveled to in your career or your life. That's pretty neat to see.
There you go. We've got our listeners have a challenge from Chris Marshall to add into the chat in the comment section. As I mentioned, today is our first international guest on Alumless, which is definitely exciting. We often work with partners both domestically and abroad that have a global engagement strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about today is global engagement and some of the challenges that come with it. But Chris, when I tee up that topic, challenges around global engagement, what's kind of the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, always the first thing that comes to mind is the tension between. I'm hearing an echo. Are we all right?
I think you're okay. I heard a little one, but
Yeah,
we'll press on.
The tension between the fact that the vast majority of most U.S. based institutions, alumni population, are domestic, and often, especially depending on the type of institution, frankly, if you're a state institution in the middle of the country, even a regional public institution, your percentage of international alumni is pretty small. Yet there's often institutional priority around global engagement, global fill in the blank, and the tension between wanting to engage your alumni who live in the United States, who live in your state, live in your region or city, where there's a large population, versus the institutional goal to be more global in our presence in every way. How do you reconcile that? We don't do a good enough job in engaging our alums locally, let alone globally. And so that tension always is something that comes to my mind first. And it's an interesting one. I think there's lots of reasons to be global in our approach in all ways, from recruitment of students to partnerships with other universities to potential career seeking, graduates. But it is an interesting tension because, a typical public institution's international population in the U.S. is going to be less than 5%. It's a little bit higher for private institutions, but it's very small. So, but I understand that, and we're going to talk about somebody who knows how to think about this really well. So Chris Kendrick is our perfect person for this.
Yeah, and no doubt, I would imagine Chris is going to share some of those challenges. LSC being a very global school,
very global institution, yep.
But with a huge population of alumni that live probably in the greater London area. All right, well, let's not guess about what Chris Kendrick is going to tell us. Let's bring him out to the show. Hello, Chris Kendrick.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Chris, good to see you.
We're fortunate to have you. Thank you for making time for Alumless. I'm sure it's about the last thing you've got on your plans before you head into the weekend.
It's a nice Friday afternoon activity, yes.
Awesome. Well, in our conversations, before the show, we discussed the challenges associated with building a modern global engagement strategy. How is your team thinking about engaging LSE alumni and supporters around the world?
Well, just to go back to Chris's point where you mentioned, is it 5% of US alumni typically overseas?
At a public institution. Yeah.
Public institutions, sorry. 64% of our LSE alumni community is based outside the UK. So that immediately speaks to the wonderful diversity of our alumni body, but also to some of the challenges we face in delivering programs that meet everyone's various needs. So we focus on this in different ways through our strategy. We have a wonderful network of alumni chapters and volunteers across the world through our Alumni Association. We know that they are the best ambassadors for the institution out in the world. So when people can't come back to campus or be near us, we know there are people organising activities with and for each other and also on our behalf around the world. A second area is to really make our digital proposition better, so our content better, and to try to make it bespoke and regionally variant. We're not there yet. We're in the process of improving how we work with different audiences to make our content more relevant. There can be a tendency to project out from London, not recognizing, well, we're inviting you to an event on campus next week. Maybe that's not the way to go. So we've got much better over the past 4 or 5 years in how we target people. And then the third aspect to it is investing in our team infrastructure to provide a better way of developing those programs so that we can coordinate it well. And that means having alumni engagement resource focusing on regional areas. So we've just created 2 new roles to focus on Asia and Europe. We already have an office in New York to focus on the North American audience so that we can develop volunteer support, content, programs that have a bit more nuance to them, a bit more specific purpose to those audiences. And I think you've been speaking about the pandemic at the start here. As desperate as the pandemic was, that really forced us into action as a sector. And I imagine it was the same for you in the US. We were so heavily reliant on in-person event activity. Now, through the pandemic, we all learned on the hoof. We were suddenly having people, I'm sat in my son's bedroom here today. You're sat in various parts of your homes too. That was suddenly how we could operate, but we could still continue to keep the show on the road and draw people near. I think we've got to learn from here in the next phases, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later on as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we learned a lot about the opportunities that exist through our content and through digital. And it's been really interesting, at least here in the States, to see how the trend is definitely shifting right back towards in-person engagement, which makes a lot of sense, right? We now can visit again with groups of people freely. But what did we learn about digital that was so useful and helpful that we can carry forward and make sure that we don't forget? But of course, you have plenty of graduates that live in the greater London area. I think you said, was it 64%, 65% was the number of international?
Yes, so 36% of our alumni base are international, so we've got about 64,000 alumni in the UK, with the 75% or so based around London and the surrounding area. Yeah.
And so how do those folks, the folks that live around LSE, what have you uncovered about their engagement preferences?
So we probably are able to adhere more closely to what was the traditional model for engagement, having the campus attraction and being able to be around in person. Although, to your earlier point in the conversation, I think we're finding that people had digital fatigue post-pandemic. Everyone wanted to come back to campus. We're actually seeing now some trends in a bit of fall off in in-person attendance too. So we've got to work our way through that. We don't yet have all the data, so we've got some questions to ask about what the best balance might be. But very definitely for people in London, there is that physical incentive to be able to come together on campus and network. Just before the pandemic, we opened an Alumni Centre, which is a fabulous space on campus. We're one of the few UK institutions, to my knowledge, to have one of those. We had it for 6 months and then the pandemic hit. So it actually became a testing centre. It actually served a purpose for the community, but we hadn't rolled it out with any great momentum before we were forced to all start working remotely. In the year since it's reopened, we've had about 7,000 bespoke visits, which is absolutely fantastic. And it shows that people from around the world, but obviously in London at the time, it's a front door to campus for them. So we're bringing them back into the programme. And then it's helping to lead to other things such as data updates, conversations where they can engage with current students as well. It's a really, really vibrant hub on campus for us. But yeah, we're trying to work out what the balance needs to look like. If you have the ability to be in and on campus, we've got the public lecture program, which is broadcast around the world as podcasts and streams. But to physically be able to be a part of the environment community is something that we know we're fortunate to have in London. I think it's how we engage more broadly that still is a bit of a challenge that we are working through.
Yeah. Well, I actually have a challenge for our listeners as well. I would actually love, if you're listening live in the chat, to hear from pre-pandemic in-person event attendance levels to now. Are you seeing more participation, more event participation in person, about the same, or are you seeing a drop compared to pre-pandemic levels? There we go. I've added another challenge to our comment section. Let's see if there's some takers. But so Chris, Chris Marshall, we had one of the challenges of having two Chris's on an episode of Alumless is fortunately we have a script, right? But last show, we had Dory Sontag from Gonzaga on the show to talk about athletics alumni engagement. But that's really a US-based dynamic, right? I mean, there's not intercollegiate athletics that's comparable, really, in the UK, Canada, Australia, other places around the world. How do you think that changes the calculus on where to apply resources when it comes to engagement strategies?
Yeah. Well, I do think, though, that while there's not that same fervor we have around, for example, March Madness going on right now, last night and tonight. Good luck to Gonzaga tonight, by the way. The UK is different in that regard. Everywhere else in the world is different, but there's still, I think, strong affiliation to sport. I mean, if you rode crew, if you played rugby or played football, as we say, your affiliation to those groups, I think, will still be strong. It may not have the same sort of collegiate version that we have here in the U.S. So I do think there's affinity. I do still think there's affinity, but
affinity, but not fan, maybe, right?
Yeah, probably
kind of the difference.
Fandom, no. Affinity, yes. Maybe that's right. Well, I would love to hear Chris answer this too. But my take on this is, though, that it comes down to the two words that I think are the two that are left in the value that we can add to our alumni. And I've always said this: it's content and network. What can we provide that's unique to LSE in this example? From a content standpoint, is you have some of the best renowned, researchers and faculty in the world who can speak to your base delivering content. But you also have a unique, although you can get the network on LinkedIn, you still own the network as LSE. That's your network, and that's the two distinct propositions that I think we can offer. So I think what we're seeing outside, even in the U.S., we're seeing more schools leveraging those. But outside the U.S., you see those are the two areas where we're content and network, where you see international institutions leveraging the connections with their alumni in that regard.
Chris Kendrick, can you comment just a little bit on that follow-up thought on sort of athletics-related engagement?
Yeah, and I know, Ryan, you and I have spoken slightly differently about the role that looking at sport can play in engagement for us, and it is very different for us in the UK, because while people will be members of various sports and athletic teams, there's nothing like the same fervour. We watch on Friday night lights, even a high school element that you have in the States. For maybe like, what on earth is this? You have stadia for college football bigger than our professional Premier League stadia. It's astonishing. So we don't have that. But when I first joined LSE, I was immediately struck by something you just touched on, Chris, that enduring connection to the academic rigor of the institution and the social impact that we have. I've only worked at LSE in the sector. I imagine it's the same in other institutions, but there's almost an astonishing pride in what LSE's role in the world is. And I think that's the hook that we can always go back to. And that's the same with recent graduates and graduates of the 50s and 60s. That still hangs up and stands true. So it's a really interesting hook. And Chris, there's something for us to do in the global engagement about learning from professional sports membership. So I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or a bit later on, but I think it's something that we can really do that might be interesting.
Well, let's follow up on our topic du jour, which is global alumni engagement. Not as though we've strayed too far from it, but you have a massive international alumni audience, including here in the US. You mentioned actually earlier that you have, I think, a New York office, right, for LSE. What have you discovered about LSE alumni that live in the US? And from an organizational standpoint, how do you think about and prioritize engagement strategies for alumni that live in the US versus other places in the world?
Well, immediately there's that historic engagement of alumni with their alma mater in the US that is not the same in every part of the world. And speaking for myself, if I didn't work in the sector, I had a fabulous time at university. I can't guarantee I'd have stayed in contact with my alma mater because it didn't come naturally to us. I was at university in the 90s. It's embedded and ingrained in how I think a lot of you behave in the US in particular. So that can be seen for us that our oldest recognized alumni group is our alumni and friends of LSE in the USA. It's significant because ahead of the curve, probably not in the US, but for us here, like, wow, an alumni group, that's amazing. And it's a very different set of expectations that come from that. We've had a wonderful team in New York for the best part of 2 decades. And they obviously understand the local nuances of the audience with the connection back to the school too. So that works well for us. But we've got around 27,000 alumni in the USA, just for context. So it's a significant number of people. What we see is that high affinity. So for many US alumni, their year or years at LSE, possibly the first time they'd lived abroad. So a formative experience in their lives. And we're not actually competing with other alma mater in the same sense. We've got our complementary space. So a lot of our alumni volunteers I talk to, those particularly from the US, love where they went to in the States. They love LSE. They engage with both institutions, perhaps in slightly different ways. There's probably a bit more nostalgia for us because if it is that formative experience, it's slightly different. But it just allows us to really work slightly differently and to recognize that the challenge we have is where we can't quite match up to the expectations of what takes place at the big institutions. Because while we compete intellectually, we don't necessarily have the same resources for our programs that some of the US institutions do have.
Right. Can I go off script for a second and ask?
Yeah. It's your show.
All right. You're the host, though.
Right.
Chris, how closely do you work with your colleagues on the development fundraising side to think about those 20,000 alums in the U.S., of those who have capacity, potential, who can make significant gifts or any kind of giving to the institution? Is that a part of the strategy that you're going to coordinate with them, or are you thinking more broadly only?
So we're part of the same philanthropy and global engagement office, and we work very closely with our development colleagues. We know that there is a more advanced relationship with philanthropy in the US than in other parts of the world. And in terms of even understanding the potential connection in the pipeline between engagement, volunteering, and what can come next in terms of philanthropy, in terms of cash support, that's further advanced in the US. So we work to try to bring forward the opportunities for engagement that help in those conversations for the fundraising colleagues. So we're getting much better at joining up within our international strategy for engagement, but it's always been there. It's always worked pretty well. But I think it's fair to say that there are more advanced relationships with alumni in the US than there are in other parts of the world at certain moments.
Yeah, thank you.
Just pointing out too, in our chat, we had two people chime in, Lindsay and Kimberly, that they saw a decline in in-person event attendance since pre-pandemic levels. But Lindsay notes that virtual engagement has diversified things and really opened up engagement opportunities for people around the world, which is a perfect segue to my next question for Chris Kendrick, which is, in our pre-show call, we talked about the idea of content co-creation, which is, I'm not sure it's like phrasing that we use very much in this space, but I think we're going to start talking about it a lot more, and how it's an important part of building a global alumni community. Can you share a bit more about the concept of content co-creation that we discussed, and how you anticipate using content to drive engagement?
Yeah, and it's something that I'm excited for us to work differently on as well, because it's something that's different for how we've behaved in the past. So the idea is that there are two strands to it. Internally, we'll work with colleagues to see how those beyond alumni engagement and communications can get more involved in what we do to engage our external audiences. So move away from what maybe a historic model of, we want something, we want comms to help us articulate it, away we go. We want to get people to become owners of their own content internally, so that we can recognize their expertise in the relationships that they manage in the institution. So that's one strand to it. The more exciting bit that we want to get to is how we engage external audiences, and primarily alumni volunteers in the first instance, so that we change our habits. I think in the sector we can be a bit guilty of talking at our audiences somewhat. So here's what we think you like, here's what we need to tell you, here's a call to action, with variations in between. And I think that's fine, and it has worked, but I think people's expectations are a bit more sophisticated now. So what we want to do, and we're using the auspices of our Shaping the World campaign, is to actually harness that intellectual curiosity of our alumni to advance conversations that are key to us, but key to them. And I think become better at storytelling, so that there's a shared conversation, not something that we're prescribing from the institution. It's early. We're working through this. We've been doing some great work with an agency called Pickle Jar to help us take forward the content strategy. But if it evolves as I hope it will, it changes how we're able to plan content together, and to give people voices from their peers. Because while we expect that everyone wants to hear from senior faculty, from school leadership, a lot of alumni have said to us they also want to hear from their peers. So if they're hearing from their peers in terms relevant to them, but about issues that are relevant to all of us, I think that's probably quite an exciting area for us to develop.
Yeah, and I was just helping another university the other day who's hiring a digital engagement person for their team, and the words influencer and contributor, guest contributor, and these words that imply sort of bringing aboard a group of alumni and donors, right, who can help tell stories alongside the university that create a two-way conversation with people. And so that, as you said, they're not talking at people all the time. But Marshall, hearing Chris Kendrick's thoughts on content co-creation, what do you see as the role of digital engagement moving forward when it comes to building a global engagement strategy?
Simply put, it's the best chance we have, I think, to engage at scale without, if you had unlimited resources, you could do a lot of things, really, really cool things. But we don't. And most institutions listening to this podcast don't have even the resources of an LSE or fill in the blank, any other institution here in the U.S. that has. There's some places that can do this very well because their pockets are deep, and most places can't. And so scaling it is the only way to do so is through digital. And the other thing I've been pushing clients, even some more elite schools that have bigger budgets, I say to them, the content exists. We don't need to create the content. We can curate the existing content and put it forward to our alumni in ways that are meaningful to them. And every day there's lectures going on campus that alums would be interested in. How do we track what those are, make sure they're available, record them appropriately, or make them available live if we can do so. And curating that content is, I think, a role of an alumni office more so than creating content, frankly. Chris, do you do any of that kind of curation work around LSE to deliver?
So that's a part of what we're discussing too. So there's the co-creation bit and then the curation aspect to it. what we're working towards, and it comes around to a question around technology sometimes too, but is to do that mass engagement at scale that you refer to, Chris, so that we're able to tailor pockets of content that exist already and purpose them for different audiences in slightly different ways. And we've done it reasonably well over the past couple of years, but there's so much more we can explore, different places to take it. And that also requires an exploration of how we look at perhaps personas and trends within the database, rather than, we know a lot about behavioral data to do with when people open a link or volunteer or give. We've not always had wonderful insight on their attitudes to certain things. Right. I think that's what we're trying to build up.
What database are you using at LSE?
We use Advanced, so it's been with the institution for a number of years, and I think yeah, there are limitations to any system, aren't there? And I think we know that we need to move forward in the next few years with a more sophisticated approach to how we use our CRM.
Yeah.
And you made a call out to Pickle Jar Communications earlier, and Tracy Plale, the leader of that organization, is really one of the great minds in our space when it comes to content strategy in the education sector. So I interviewed Tracy years ago for a different show, and she had a great story to tell. And if those of you who have never heard of Tracy here in the US and Pickle Jar, you should definitely take a look at her shop.
Christy, we talked about faculty and using curating. Do you use Alumni to deliver any of the content? An alum expert who's written a book, or?
So we've sourced various alumni participants in panel activity and talking where they've got. This is what I want to change in terms of a lot of the digital content. This is the move forward, to try to engage industry experts who are alumni or thematic experts around sustainability or social cohesion. That's the way forward for us. I think it's going to be quite exciting.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, and sort of add on top of that, Chris Kendrick, where do you see the need for continued innovation in the field of alumni engagement?
I think it comes back to technology too. And I don't know how it is for you in the States necessarily, but for us, it feels like everyone has more sophisticated user experiences in their daily lives that we're a bit behind. And that's not just to do with us, perhaps in other parts of the world to the US, but I think if the experience we give them is stuck in the 90s while their daily consumer life is hurtling towards the 2030s, there's a problem, there's a disconnect. And I think we've got to be cognizant of sometimes the impediments that we have in terms of how quickly we embrace technology. So for us, for over a period of years, it was, let's get an app. Well, by the time we thought about getting an app, it had moved on significantly. Let's have basically inventing LinkedIn for universities. Well, LinkedIn exists, so let's work out how we take that forward. And I think if there can be space for technology and the ability to be brave, to think slightly differently, and to not fear failure either, to try something. It doesn't, of course you don't want to upset your audiences, but you want to be able to try things. If they don't work, you learn and you take that forward. And I think innovating can come in different guises.
And to that end, I was just thinking about this yesterday. I ordered 2 articles of clothing, 2 pairs of pants the other day, and they were expensive, and so I was stuck at the cart. I was like, didn't push the trigger on that, and I got an email saying, "Do you want us to give you 2 for 1, so that you go ahead and do that?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I should do that." And then hours later, they were like, "We have another color. If you buy that, we'll give you 30% off." I was like, gosh, I darn near did that. And then a day later, they're like, "We're actually announcing our new color next week. Would you like to get on our mailing list?" And I was like, I almost signed up for that too, to get text messages. And so it's just very sophisticated in the private sector as to how engagement happens and how conversions happen, right? Whether it's a gift or a sign up for something. And it's just so impressive to see that advanced technology in action. And then to think about, we have very little capability to do that type of a thing. We're just starting to get with advanced technology like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Eloqua or some of those other tools that are out there. But wow. Go ahead. Did you want to add a thought to that?
I was just going to say, but the positive thing is we are getting there. And I think that's what we've seen over the past couple of years. There is a willingness in teams to try new ideas and to try things. And I love that. Let's do what we can. We have to recognize our responsibilities, but to try to bridge the gap between that consumer external world experience and what people might historically have expected from their alma mater, because we can do a lot more.
I totally agree. It's what gets me excited about the space that we're in, is there's so much opportunity for growth. We are bumping up against our top of the hour, which means we are finished with our live broadcast with Chris Kendrick. Of course, we're going to head to the Zoom room and record our bonus segment. But before we do, Chris Marshall, who is our guest on the next Alumless?
Dan Olds from Bowdoin College. Dan has a lengthy experience in the business. He's at Colby College for a while, went down to Queens University in Charlotte, and he's back at up at Maine and Bowdoin College for the past year. And the topic's going to be focused around engaging and managing volunteers, international volunteers from their perspective, but also micro volunteering and the work that they're doing. Some really cool stuff right now around focus group discussions with their alumni, and I've been part of it. It's been a lot of fun. And so Dan will be our guest in 2 weeks' time.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll say goodbye. Have a great weekend, everyone. Be sure to just subscribe to the podcast edition of Alumless to hear our bonus section with Chris and all of our other guests. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with Dan Olds.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.